If you're like me, you like to have a lot of decorative pillows around. I use them on my couch, I use them on the beds, but they take a lot of storage room. While you have 2 of those sitting on your couch, you have 10 more in your closet, taking enough space to store a small horse. Okay, maybe that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. Well, what if I told you there's a more efficient way to have decorative pillows, and that is to use pillow coverings. These are super easy to sew, and that's what we're going to do in today's tutorial. So in this tutorial, I'm going to use some sewing clips. I have a rotary cutter. I have a metal ruler. I have my measuring tapes. I always like to have snips nearby when I'm using my sewing machine. I have some fabric cutting scissors. I only use this on fabric. And then look at this super cute fabric. Now I'm also going to use a small iron and my heat press. You really should use an iron to press your things when you're sewing. It makes them so much more professional looking. Then I also have this mat. To sew the project, I'm going to use my old faithful sewing machine that I've had for close to 30 years. For most projects, you really don't need a new fancy sewing machine. So if you're interested in seeing this tutorial, sit back, relax, and let's get started. To know what size to cut my fabric, we're going to have to measure the pillow. So that's the first step. Let me show you another pillow cover that I've made though, just so you understand what we're doing. With the way I'm going to make my pillow, you have one piece of fabric that wraps all the way around the pillow from side to side. So there's no seam on this side, there's no seam on this side. It's simply wrapped all the way around the pillow. The seams are at the top and the bottom. The way you get the pillow inside is you have this opening right here. Now you don't want your opening just to butt up against each other, because once you put the pillow in there, it would gap open. So I have about an inch or inch and a half overlap. We'll need to take that into consideration to know how large to cut my fabric. And just like I said in the intro, look at how easy these are to fold up and store away. They just don't take much room. Another thing to consider is the direction of your fabric. So I'm using this fabric. I made a little zipper pouch for myself and I made one for my daughter, and there's really no direction to this fabric. You can put it in any direction and it's going to look correct. Unlike a fabric like this. This is the top, this is the bottom. That's another thing you really need to take into consideration when you're cutting your fabric. So let's just measure this and see what size of fabric we need. I'm going to start by putting a tape measure or a measuring tape under the pillow. And I'm going to loosely, let me get it flattened out first. I'm going to loosely pull it around the pillow. And I want to do it loosely because I don't have to wrestle with my pillow to get it inside. Okay, so this is just over 35 and a half. Now I need to add some extra length to that so that I can fold this piece under a couple of times and sew it, fold this piece under a couple of times and sew it, and have this overlap. I'm going to go ahead and add 4 additional inches on, so I'll cut mine at 39 and a half inches. Now because the fabric's going all the way around the pillow, in determining the height, you're just going to have the height of the pillow. We're not wrapping it around that way also, so we just need half of the pillow, or the top side of the pillow. There's a couple ways you can measure that. One would be just to go from seam to seam. So if I start at this seam and I go over here, it's about 12 and a quarter. I would want to add on at least an inch and a half to that. I think I would cut mine at 14 inches. But let's go ahead and see how far it is around the pillow and divide by 2. Because if the pillow isn't made perfectly, if the seam's not exactly in the center of the sides, you could come up with a different number. So when I loosely wrap mine around, I come up with 24 and a half, slightly more than 24 and a half. So half of that would be 12 and a quarter roughly. 12 and a quarter. I want to add on a good 1.5 inches or so to this. I'm just going to go ahead and round up to 14. So I'm going to cut my fabric at 39.5 by 14. Once I have my fabric cut and ironed, I'll meet you right back here and we'll move on to the next step. I have my fabric cut down to size, and I considered putting a thin interfacing on it because this is fairly thin fabric. But when I lay it on my pillow, that looks smooth. I don't see lumps or bumps, so I'm going to go without the interfacing. But if you have fabric that's a little see-through or really thin, you could iron some fusible interfacing to the inside of this. So let's start by sewing our ends. And by that, what I'm talking about are these two pieces right here. To get the width of fabric I needed, I had to leave this on, but that's going to be okay. We're going to deal with that because we're going to flip it under once, flip it under twice, and once you do that, you don't see that white even on the back. If you're really picky, one thing you can do is you can use a ruler like this, or even a piece of cardstock, something with a really straight edge. And that can be your guide for flipping it over. Let's move that just a little bit more. I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to start ironing it. Or pressing it is the more appropriate word. So I'm going to lightly press it, just so I can see where it needs to be pressed a little bit better. And when you're a little OCD like I am, you just come up with things like this to help you out. You don't need to do it this way. So I have it folded over once. Let's go ahead and get that pressed in just a little bit more. Now I'll just use this as my guide and fold it again. I'm going to go ahead and lightly press it very quickly along my table just to get that fold mark. Then I'll use my pressing mat. I'm going to do the exact same thing at this end. Then we'll put it around our pillow and see how it looks. And I didn't really say, but I flipped it over about 1/2 inch, maybe slightly less on the first flip. If you want to have larger areas that you flip inside, then just add that to the amount of fabric that you need. Okay, so that leaves me with an overlap of just a little bit more than 1 inch, and I love that amount. So now I'm going to sew down the top of this side and then the top of this side. Just to kind of hold it in place, I am going to go ahead and put some clips on it. Now, if you don't have clips or if you prefer regular old straight pins, that's perfectly fine. I just love these clips. I can see that my words are slightly showing through. This is the side that has the words. So in the end, when I make this pillow, I'm going to make sure that this side extends over this side. So I want the words to be covered. So this side over that side. Here's my old faithful sewing machine. It is an old Singer, almost 30 years old. I have the stitch width, just a straight stitch. I have the tension on auto, and then I have the stitch length at about 2.5. The two ends of this will get sewn over later, so I don't know that you'd necessarily have to backstitch, but I'm going to backstitch. I'm using a thread that coordinates with the fabric. And I'm going to have the material where it's about even with the presser foot. That'll help me keep it straight. I like to go ahead and put my needle down in and then lower my presser foot. So here's how I do the next step. I'm going to lay my fabric out, put my pillow in the center, and then let's just pull these two ends around. All right, that overlap is probably a little less than I would prefer. So next time I would either do smaller inseams or smaller folds, or I'd cut it another 1/2 inch or 1 inch. Now let's see which end have the words under it. It's this end. So let me think about this. I need that to be on the outside because when I flip my material right side out, then it'll be on the inside. Yes, so I need the fabric to be like that. And then I'm going to get the amount of overlap I want here. But let me clip it here. And then here's the other side or the other end. So I'll clip it there as well. Now let's turn it around and do the same thing over here. Now I would rather this be more centered, so I'm going to try to work it more toward the center. So we are going to line up this side. We're going to go ahead and add a couple of clips to it. Then I'm going to get my pillow out of the middle. So I need to hold on to those clips. They're not as strong, or they don't hold the fabric together as strongly as actual pins. Okay, so we have this side clipped together over here. So that's going to help us keep it straight. Now I'm just going to add more clips around the outside. We have 2 seams to do. Okay, I'm going to flip this over so I can see how the 2 sides line up. And I think that looks pretty good. All right, is it laying pretty flat? Does that look good? I think it looks fine. Let's go ahead and sew this. I'll sew one side first. Then I'll sew the other side. Then all we have to do is flip this right side out and put our pillow in. I'm going to go ahead and make my side seams about a 1/2 inch. If I find that that's not tight enough around the pillow, I can just sew another one. There's nothing that keeps you from doing that. I am going to sew on the side that has the opening because I want to make sure that my stitches go over that nice and smoothly. Okay, let's go ahead and turn this right side out. If the pillow fits well, I'm going to turn it back like this and trim down some of those sides. I'm going to use some pinking shears because they are supposed to help it keep from unraveling. But because you leave this opening in it, It makes this super easy to finish off. All right, let's just poke out those corners. Not that it matters that much because I'm going to have to turn it inside out again, but I just want to see how it looks. So what I like to do is I like to get the inside piece and put the pillow in that side first. We're going to pull it and tug it and get it down to the end. And why do I have pink thread on there? Now I'm just going to kind of bunch this up and tuck it inside. Then just take a few minutes to get it nice and crisp and where it's supposed to be. And then if you tug on this, and of course I'm going to press this at the end, but that helps that be a lot more smooth. Now, did I make my pillow cover small enough? Is there too much excess room in there? I think it's going to be fine just like that. And the thing is I did not pre-wash this, and I probably should have because this is cotton, so it could actually shrink a little. So I'm going to keep it this side. I think the 39.5 inches around that way is great. I do think that next time I could probably, instead of cutting it at 14 inches, I could either cut it at 13 3/4 or just make my seam a little bit wider. That would fix the issue too. So let's go ahead and take this out. And then we'll turn it wrong side out again and we'll trim this down. If you wanted to, for strength, you could go back over those seams again. I don't think my daughter's going to be too rough on this, but that is something that you could do if you felt that was necessary. I'm pretty sure I didn't talk about these pinking shears in the intro. They totally are optional, but I want to go ahead and use them. I'm not going to get close to my thread. I just want to cut off this outside piece, all that fringe. I don't like that. So I'm just going to cut it off, press it, put it back on the pillow, and then I'll show you what it looks like at the end. After trimming off the frayed edges with my pinking shears, I turned the pillow cover right side out, poked out the corners, and then pressed the top and bottom seams as well as other parts of the pillow. I really can't stress enough how much better your projects can look if you take a bit of time to press them. Besides pressing, I think that taking the time to get your pillow corners deep into the pillow cover corners and then adjusting your pillow gives this a really finished off look. Here's what it looks like in the end, and I think it turned out really nice. I also love that this same concept works for any shape of pillow, and you just have to adjust the dimensions of your cut fabric. Check out the video description on my final thoughts of what I would cut my fabric to next time if you plan to make a pillow cover like this. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great day, and until my next video, bye-bye. I have a, what is this called?